Live from London, this is BBC News. US President Joe Biden appears on television from the White House to explain his decision to exit the presidential race.
Nothing can come in the way of saving our democracy.
The UK government admits its new green power scheme, Great British Energy, will not reduce bills overnight. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu tells the US Congress that his country will need to control security in Gaza when the war there is over. After pummeling Taiwan and the Philippines with torrential rain and strong winds, Typhoon Gaimi heads for southern China. And we're in Paris, where the first events of the Olympics have taken place ahead of Friday's opening ceremony. Hello and welcome, I'm Samantha Simmons. We start in the US, where President Biden has used a televised address from the White House to say that he abandoned his re-election bid to save American democracy. The 81-year-old, who until last weekend had resisted calls to stand aside, said it was time for younger voices to emerge and that he wanted to pass the torch to a new generation. He praised his Vice President, Kamala Harris, as a tough and capable leader. At a Republican Party campaign rally, Donald Trump told his supporters that Biden had pulled out because he was losing. From Washington, Will Grant reports.
In a speech no sitting president has delivered in more than half a century, Joe Biden confirmed his decision to drop out of the race to the American people. It was time for new voices, and yes, he acknowledged, younger voices.
So I've decided the best way forward is to pass the torch to a new generation. That's the best way to unite our nation.
Nothing could get in the way of saving democracy, said President Biden, including personal ambition. He painted November's vote as a choice between forwards or back, hope or hate, unity or division. Despite Republicans calling for him to resign the presidency, Mr. Biden said he had no intention of stepping aside.
Over the next 6 months, I'll be focused on doing my job as president. That means I'll continue to lower costs for hardworking families, grow our economy. I'll keep defending our personal freedoms and our civil rights, from the right to vote to the right to choose.
President of the United States, Joe Biden.
It's just a month since his make-or-break presidential debate with Donald Trump. His halting, at times garbled performance, a moment he never came back from.
With the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with.
Now it's almost certain the person he's passing that torch to is his Vice President, Kamala Harris. Her campaign has gone from strength to strength, generating tens of millions of dollars in record time, and has energized a despondent base. She even seems to have settled on a slogan.
We are not going back. We are not going back.
Many of those watching weren't alive the last time a US president did this. In 1968, Lyndon Johnson moved aside only to see the Republican challenger, Richard Nixon, ultimately win the presidency. Mr. Biden will hope that history won't be repeating itself with Donald Trump. In North Carolina, the Republican candidate dropped the short-lived unifying tone of his campaign, turning on both the president and his new presumptive rival alike.
We officially defeated the worst president in the history of our country, crooked Joe Biden. He quit because he was losing so badly in the polls. He was down in every single poll and down by a lot, so he quit.
Politics is all Mr. Biden has ever known, a career which has spanned 5 decades from, as he put it, a kid with a stutter from Scranton to the White House. This decision will define his legacy. November's vote will define whether that gamble has worked. Will Grant, BBC News, Washington.
Let's speak to Gina Yanitel Reinhardt now, Professor of US Government at the University of Essex. Welcome to you, Professor. Good to have you on the programme. What did you make of President Biden's speech, given that he seemed to gloss over issues, questions around his cognitive abilities?
Well, he certainly didn't want to address those issues and give them credibility. He is trying to make sure that he has 6 months where he can still accomplish something and still have authority and respect and credibility rather than be dismissed and continually called to resign.
Yeah, he said he would finish the job, didn't he? What now for his remaining 6 months in office? Is he a lame duck president, or will he use this as an opportunity perhaps to push things through that may be unpopular and he might not have been able to do otherwise?
It's going to be a bit of both, actually. There are many people in Congress, the entire House of Representatives, and 1/3 of the Senate are also campaigning for re-election right now. That means that many of them will not be paying a lot of attention to laws being made, and they will definitely try to thwart any legislation that Biden would attempt to push through. So he will probably concentrate on the things he can do without new legislation. That's going to be a lot of the foreign policy, the Israel-Palestine situation, Ukraine and Russia. It's also going to be continuing to push some of the domestic issues that he still can without any major legislative initiative.
So Kamala Harris, his vice president, is hitting the campaign trail hard now. How does she play this, given that she's been number 2 in the White House for 4 years now? Does she distance herself from any Biden policies that may have made him unpopular? What does she do to try and push this over the line?
I think it's unlikely for her to distance herself from anything at this point. She was a part of the policies and the administration, and trying to pretend that she is not a part of that is a bad idea. What I think she's going to do, and what we will see, is that she will be pushing herself ahead of those things. In other words, taking those issues and stating them more strongly, pledging more aggression on those issues, working and putting herself out in front of them, so to speak. So she is going to take a harder stance against Trump's felonious actions. She's going to make a bigger priority speaking about women's rights and reproductive rights. This is evidence in her first campaign speech, which she gave to a group of women.
Officially, of course, she isn't the presumptive nominee even yet for the Democratic Party, is she? But it seems like everyone is assuming she is going to be, including Donald Trump, who yesterday called her a radical left lunatic. There's been lots of attack ads put out by the Republican candidates, Republican presidential campaign already. How nasty do you think this is going to get?
Terribly, horribly nasty. She is able to withstand that, which is really great. What we're going to see is that there's very little in terms of a scandal that she has in her background. And because of that, we're likely to see the Trump campaign make up and potentially fabricate things for people to worry about regarding Kamala Harris. They're going to continue to attack her character, and they're going to continue to try to come up with new things that we don't know and that nobody knows for reasons for people to oppose her.
OK, Professor, really interesting to get your thoughts. Thanks very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Just want to bring you some breaking news now following a typhoon that's hit the Philippines. The Philippines Coast Guard have said they found the body of a missing crew of an oil tanker that sank earlier today in Manila Bay. They said that the MT Terra Nova capsized and eventually submerged 3.6 nautical miles east of Limay in Bataan earlier today. And an oil spill has been detected, and maritime environmental protection personnel are mobilised to help contain it. We'll have more on the fallout from that typhoon a little bit later on this hour. Now, though, a major new energy plan, which was at the heart of Labour's UK election manifesto, will not reduce bills overnight. The government minister, Ed Miliband, has admitted. Details of the first major plan from the new Great British Energy Company are being announced and include building thousands of new wind farms on areas of seabed owned by the royal family. Our cost of living correspondent Coletta Smith reports.
The price, the source, and the future of energy in the UK are hot topics. So now the government is putting a little more meat on the bones of their election pledge to create Great British Energy. The company won't supply any power to households. Instead, the goal is to change the way energy is made and who owns those resources. The government is committed to spending £8.3 billion of public money investing in wind power on land and at sea, new technologies like carbon capture, nuclear power, and community schemes on a small scale or for local communities to benefit from big projects near them. They hope that'll be matched by £60 billion of private company investment, but there's no guarantee that will happen. So will it work?
I think GB Energy is fixing a different problem, which is more about who owns the assets rather than whether or not they get built. It's a government priority to say that the GB state owns some of it, which doesn't necessarily fix the issue, which is making it investable is a bigger issue for hitting our targets. We need to have the certainty of revenues for investors to say, yes, I will put my money down, because with a renewable project, most of the capital injection is up front. You need to spend a lot of money at the beginning.
Today, the Crown Estate is getting in on the act. It owns vast swathes of coastline and seabed around the UK and says that partnering with the government will halve the time it takes to get offshore wind projects delivering power. So the ball is now rolling on a key election promise, but it's a long-term plan which needs a fair wind from investors. That means customers are unlikely to see any benefit in their bills for a long time yet. Coletta Smith, BBC News.
Well, the Conservative Party have called the government plans a gimmick, but Energy Secretary Ed Miliband insists the new company is absolutely the right plan.
The mandate on which this government was elected was to make us what we call a clean energy superpower, to drive forward investment in renewables, in nuclear, in clean energy, to get off that dependence on fossil fuels. Now, GB Energy, Great British Energy, is one of the most important tools in the box to help us do that. A publicly owned energy generation company investing in that clean power to get us off our dependence on fossil fuels, create good jobs, and frankly, generate wealth for the country.
Well, let's get more on this and speak with Fraser Stewart, who works for the independent not-for-profit energy research organisation Regan, where he leads work on making the transition to net zero work for communities. Welcome to you. Thanks very much for being with us. We were just hearing that report there. The government's committing $8.3 billion to this idea, but actually $60 billion is needed from private investment. And there's questions around whether that money is really there and going to be readily available. What's your view on that?
So we know that in terms of the scale of the transition, we absolutely need significant amounts of private sector investment to get us over the line, particularly on these larger technologies like offshore wind. There is plenty of interest in investment in this area. The challenge that we have is the scale of these projects. The initial investment is really, really significant. Some of these technologies, such as floating offshore wind, are also quite risky. We haven't really sort of proved the business case for them yet. So while the scale of government input through GB Energy to this is small relative to the amount of private sector investment we need, it will still serve a function of de-risking some of those more ambitious technologies. I think on the other side of this, though, something that we have to keep in mind is while GB Energy will serve a purpose in de-risking private sector investment, as a publicly owned energy company, what we really need to see at the mission at the heart of GB Energy is to make sure it is focused on capturing that ownership stake and delivering value back to citizens and communities across the country.
Yeah, the Conservative Party have called these government plans a gimmick. Do you have any sympathy with that view?
I don't think it is a gimmick. I think what's happened through the election is that GB Energy wasn't clearly enough defined, and maybe that was on purpose. But I think in terms of driving that investment, and particularly for taking an ownership stake, it's definitely a positive first step, and we'd like to see that scale up in the future. When we look out, if you're on your drive to work and you look out the window and you see solar farms or wind turbines, or if you're at the coast and you see a big offshore project, the vast majority of those, while it's positive to decarbonise the energy system, the vast majority of those aren't owned by the UK. They're not owned by citizens or communities. So GB Energy, even starting at a relatively small scale, will redress some of that by investing public money to take a share to make sure that the profits and the value from that are recycled into the UK economy. But ideally, UK government and GB Energy will work with local citizens and communities to make sure that we're putting power meaningfully back into their hands as well.
Yeah, the government's admitted that this GB Energy isn't going to see the reduction of any of our bills overnight. How important is that to have communities that you work with, ordinary people on board supporting this if we can't see the benefits ourselves?
I think that's a critical point, and one of the big challenges for Labour is to be accelerating GB Energy investment, the transition to getting our energy affordably and securely from the wind, the sun and the waves within this time frame. I think people have been made promises about clean energy projects, and we know that actually the renewables we have shielded us a very small amount from even sharper impacts from the energy crisis over the last few years. Lack of investment and a lack of progress on renewables has cost us in our pockets, again, as we've seen through the energy and cost of living crisis. So there is now, we're working sort of against the clock a little bit to accelerate these, to make sure that people do feel it in their pockets. It's not going to happen overnight, but that's not a reason to not do it. That's a reason to roll up our sleeves and get on with it just now, with citizens and with communities at the forefront of the mission of GB Energy.
OK, really interesting to get your thoughts. Fraser Stewart, thanks for joining us. I just want to bring you some breaking news coming into us now. This is concerning an incident filmed at Manchester Airport on Tuesday evening, which showed a male police officer holding a taser over a man who is lying face down on the floor. You may have seen this story. The officer then appears to stamp on and kick the man in the head while other officers shout at onlookers to stay back. Well, we've just heard that Greater Manchester Police have said they've suspended a police officer from all duties. It follows growing anger after this video emerged. We are just getting this information into us. They've also prompted a thorough review of the incident and referred themselves to the Independent Office for Police Conduct for a full independent investigation. And yes, apologies, we should have given you that warning there. Those images were distressing, but we'll bring you more on that as soon as we get it. Another piece of breaking news also just into us, and this is concerning the stabbing of a Army officer earlier on this week. We've just had that officer named. Let me just bring that to you. Jonathan Beale, our defence correspondent, has had this information just in. A defence source has confirmed to the BBC the stabbed soldier has been named as Lieutenant Colonel Mark Teaton, and that's all the information we have at the moment. We understand that he is in a serious condition after that stabbing. Do stay with us here on BBC News. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Typhoon Gaimi is moving towards southern China after pummeling Taiwan and the Philippines with torrential rain and strong winds. The authorities in mainland China have issued this year's first red alert for parts of the southeastern coast. The storm hit Taiwan on Wednesday, killing 3 people and forcing thousands to evacuate. As we heard, the Philippine Coast Guard has found the body of a missing sailor from an oil tanker that sank in Manila Bay. Our correspondent Rupert Wingfield-Hayes is in the Taiwanese capital, Taipei.
Well, as you can probably see, it is still raining here in Taipei. It's been raining solidly for the last 24 hours, but also the winds have now dropped in the last couple of hours. Very strong winds this morning. Now, the storm has pretty much passed in terms of winds off into the Taiwan Strait, now heading for the southeast coast of China. It sat over the island for most of the night. It slowed right down and did a big circle over Taiwan and moved very slowly over the mountains last night, and that means there was a huge amount of rainfall, and that has caused extensive flooding in the east and south of the island. And sadly, yes, as you say, several people have been reported as being killed from falling trees and falling masonry during those very high winds last night. But other than that, the damage fortunately appears to have been limited. As I say, quite extensive flooding, but in terms of structural damage, that appears to be fairly limited, and most places appear to have come through this storm fairly unscathed. We have now got reports of a ship off the south coast of Taiwan sinking, and the crew of that ship is currently missing. That's what the Coast Guard is telling us. So there is a rescue operation ongoing off the south coast of Taiwan to try and find the crew of that ship. But other than that, the storm has now mainly passed and is heading for the southeast coast of China.
Well, let's speak to Jan Kamenzind Broomby now, journalist based in Taipei. Jan, welcome to you. What's the latest that you can tell us, this information coming in from the Philippine Coast Guard about this oil tanker?
That's right. That information coming in only in the last few minutes about the fact that the Philippine Coast Guard has found the body of these soldiers, these fishermen that were these fishers that were thought to be missing on this ship, I should say, the sailors. We didn't know actually before. They weren't specifying whether they thought that this ship had been impacted by the typhoon. It seems now that the Coast Guard is suggesting that this has come as a result of those wild and choppy waters that we've been seeing as a result of the typhoon that spread. It didn't actually make landfall in the Philippines, but still had a big impact before shifting up, picking up strength and making landfall over Taiwan in the last 24 hours.
And Jan, what more can you tell us about the latest impact this typhoon has had where you are?
Well, as Rupert was saying, the impact in Taipei has thankfully been relatively small. You walk around, the streets are far emptier than you would imagine. They're having what's called a typhoon day. That means schools are closed, shops are closed, businesses are largely closed, although some have remained open. You can see people have boarded up their windows to protect them from any kind of damage. But the real focus now is shifting away from Taipei, and it's shifting down towards the south and towards the east of Taiwan's island. There we've seen significant levels of rainwater and flooding even in the city of Kaohsiung in the south. Social media videos showing water flooding down into car parks and people trudging through the streets that once were filled with cars, now filled with flood water. And as Rupert was adding there has been a ship that we believe has sunk essentially with 9 Myanmar nationals on board. Those nationals missing, haven't been heard from since the distress signal that they sent out. 3 other ships also run aground off the coast of the southern coast of Taiwan, and the hopes from the local Coast Guard and local governments that they will be able to rescue the people on those ships very soon.
OK, Jan, thank you for updating us there from Taipei. Now, the first events of the Paris Olympics have got underway ahead of Friday's opening ceremony along the River Seine. Amongst the events taking place were football and rugby sevens. Our correspondent Katie Gornall is in Paris with more.
Overlooking the Eiffel Tower, the beach volleyball venue is nestled just in front of it. And that's one of the things that makes this Olympic Games unique and special, the fact that you have these major landmarks scattered throughout the city, the venues rather, scattered throughout the city with major landmarks as their backdrop, the likes of the beach volleyball or the Place de la Concorde, which has been turned into a urban sports hub. But it's also one of the things, as well as making the games special, that makes them very complicated and difficult to secure. And what we're seeing now on the ground in Paris is a huge security operation, particularly focused around the River Seine and that 6-kilometre stretch where the opening ceremony will take place. And it's not so much a ring of steel, but a maze of barriers and checkpoints with police and security guards asking for passes, asking for QR codes. It's very difficult at the moment to move around the city centre if you are a local. It's closed mostly to pedestrians and to cars, and that's caused, from what we've seen, quite an element of frustration among the local people here. But then we've also seen great enthusiasm as well. You mentioned that the sport has already started. France have begun the rugby sevens, and that means that the poster boy of these games for the French, Antoine Dupont, has been in action as well. And we've seen bars and restaurants packed with big screens watching him and cheering him on and the French on. So I think a mixed picture, but I think we will see that enthusiasm grow once the opening ceremony starts, once the security operation around that specific area loosens up a bit, and once the sport really kicks into place from Saturday.
Katie Gornall there. Now, the world's largest platypus conservation centre has welcomed its first residents as part of a project to protect the semi-aquatic mammal found only in Australia. for platypuses, yes, that is correct, that is the plural of platypus, we have checked, have been released into the custom-built research centre at the zoo. It features multi-tiered streams, waterfalls, pools and earth banks. The facility will help researchers understand more about the species, which is under threat from extreme weather and humans.
Since 1943, there's only been 23 platypus born in zoos, and a lot of those we don't have today. A lot of them haven't survived. So for us to better understand how to breed platypus in a zoo environment is key to their survival, because right now we don't know how many platypus we even have in the country. It's an unknown number.
Let's just show you, before we go, a shot of the skyline in Paris, the iconic Eiffel Tower there. The Olympic opening ceremony gets underway tomorrow, all very exciting along the River Seine. They have been preparing for many, many months, as I'm sure you can imagine. Well, the game that's going to be played there underneath the Eiffel Tower is beach volleyball. Tens of thousands of people heading to the French capital for the games over the next few weeks. Stay with us here on BBC News.